I'm speaking on behalf of fungi, and we don't often report to this conference. It's been very sporadic. I will confine myself largely to what happened over the past year. But hello to all of you who don't know us. And this is a talk that is prepared half by our president, Richard Fortey, who can't be with us today, and by me. So I put it together, and I'm going to speak on 4 topics. I'm going to start with the continuing project from the FSO, and I'll call it that for short, FSO, about part of a biodiversity 5-year blitz in Blenheim, in High Park on the Blenheim estate. I'm going to talk about some individual projects over lockdown, and those are going to focus on what our president, Richard Fortey, has been up to. I'm going to talk about wider Oxfordshire, what the rest of us did in lockdown, and then I'm going to give a summary and some anticipations. Now, hopefully, if I press that, okay, yes, okay. This is High Park. This is Coombe and there's the footpath going along there. And High Park is a part of Blenheim that isn't normally open to the public. So it's been a great opportunity for us to get in, though initially, because of the pheasant shooting, we weren't allowed in the autumn. So this held us back to a certain extent, but I'm glad to say that one of the positive results of COVID, not many are there, was that the pheasant shooting didn't take place last year, isn't taking place now. So we've been allowed freer access during the best season for fungi, which is absolutely great. And the park are very keen on getting this big biodiversity survey done across the board. So lots of you will be involved, I'm sure. Entomologists, ornithologists, botanists, all the rest of you will be involved and will know if somebody is involved in some way. Okay, so that is High Park. And this is what Blenheim is about, or at any rate, most of the bits of Blenheim, and particularly this bit. This is wood pasture, a very old wood pasture with ancient oaks, some of them 500, maybe even 600 years old. So you'd expect this to be a fertile ground for fungi. There is also new plantations, so there are oaks of all ages. Hello. Yeah. And the FSO is contributing to the fungal survey with a special emphasis on ancient oak associates, such as this uncommon resupinate fungus, Radiolomyces molaris. And I'm sorry, it doesn't have an English name, and quite a lot of them won't. You can see it's got little teeth. So we've been looking at what you might think of as fungi, and also at a lot of things that live under logs or even inside the hollow trunks of the older trees. Here's one that thankfully does have an English name. This is the oak polypore, and like several of the fungi that we found, it's protected under the Wildlife and Countryside Act. And you may well know that protection for fungi in Britain is at a very early stage. We haven't even constructed really a red data book of fungi, though it's on its way, and we know some of the things that we want to protect. This is one of them. Here's something that, well, lives on little bits of tree that you wouldn't normally be able to access. You have to turn a lot of things over and even climb inside the trees for one or two of these. Anyway, this is Maruliporia pulverulenta, and this record in Blenheim is in fact the 3rd record for Britain. And all the fungi I'm going to show this time round are things we were looking at last year. So I'm not summarising the whole project. Indeed, I can't summarise the whole project because some of the things we want to say won't actually be out in the public domain until the project is finished, and it will then be written up as a book and much more easily accessible to you. You might think, is it all things under logs? No, there are plenty of more recognisable toadstooly things, agarics. This is one of my particular favourites. This is the snakeskin grisette. This is quite a scarce species that appeared at Blenheim last year and also on several other sites in 2020. And up to then, I had never seen this species after surveying in various places for 30 years. So, like many other fungi, it fruits relatively infrequently. They're not like blackberries that come up every year. Anyway, that's a large thing. It's about the colour of your familiar old fly agaric, and sorry, not about the colour, but about the same size as a fly agaric. Okay, now at this point you might say, can those of you at the back read this? Well, I jolly well hope you can't, because one of the points of this slide is not for you to be able to read all the bits on it, but to try and cram it all into one slide so that you can see that somebody has been doing an awful lot of work. So that's just to give you an impression of the bulk of what's been going on just in Richard Fortey's top room. This is what he did in lockdown, and he reports, "This was my 2020 lockdown hobby. Just as well I have little sense of smell, as these were nearly all incubated on droppings at the top of my house." So I won't go into those details, but I will tell you that this process generated 43 records of fungi, off dung from everything the size of rabbits to deer and horses. And a lot of these dung are what are called ascomycetes. Basically, we split most of the stuff that we look at into basidiomycetes, and those are things that have quite a complicated structure on usually gill edges or pore edges that release the spores. Ascomycetes are less complicated from that point of view. They have little flasks called asci, and spore release is very often triggered by things like raindrops. You can see that they might often be cup-shaped. They're not all cup-shaped, but a lot of the ones on dung are, and this has very spectacular hairs, quote unquote, around the outside. And this next guy looks a bit like half a lemon jelly, but I certainly wouldn't recommend it, that you're treating it like a lemon jelly. Other things that you find on dung a lot are what used to be all in one group. They all used to be called coprinus, and now they've been split up, but we've left the copros element because copros means dung. Okay, so there's a lot of these because shit happens and something needs to eat it. Okay, this is a newly separated Coprinopsis. It's called Pseudoniveus, wait for it, because it all used to be lumped in something called Niveus. So Copros is Greek for dung, and that's another group you can expect to find popping up. Now, none of these things are appearing when you get the dung. You just grab a handful of it and keep it nice and warm and moist and see what pops up. And hope your partner doesn't venture to the top of the house too often. And I should also mention the fact that if you find particularly dung fungi, but really pretty well any fungi, you will also, if you keep them hanging around for a while, find the fungus gnats or the beetles that live in them. And one of the important things about studying fungi is not only the fungi for themselves as primary decomposers and things that allow trees and, well, 90% of plants really to access soil minerals, but the fact that they are the bottom of a food chain with gnats and beetles, and there are really hundreds of these things, and they go into birds and sometimes small mammals and so on. The first one of these surveys that I went on, which was in 2016, was in June, and we got sorry, I'm not quite where I was expecting to be there. We got 6 tiny shriveled fungus bodies, and out of those tiny 6 shriveled dry fungus bodies, the guy doing the entomology got 200 fungus gnats. So that's just a snap idea of how important fungi are as the base of the food chain, as well as connecting with the plant world, and we wouldn't have plants in the way that we do without them. Okay, so now I'm moving on to what the rest of us did, and we did actually have some forays, particularly later last year, very strictly limited to 6 persons, and at least we were all outdoors so we could keep some distance from one another. So yes, we did have some forays. We started off, instead of having our usual survey at the Oxford Arboretum, with Richard recording an introduction to fungi on a video. And if you go onto the Harcourt Arboretum website, that is still available, and it will be permanently available. So that was a big outreach project that we did during the year, October 2020. Okay, so now I'm moving on to what Richard and indeed the rest of us were doing, which is still going on, doing some personal surveying and some small group surveys as well. And I've picked on a star reserve. I am keeping its name from you to protect the innocent. It's in South Oxfordshire, and I'd say it's probably the best site in the county. I've been putting together compilations of the species lists, and we have over 500 fungal species recorded to date. Not all 2020, of course. It's especially productive for Cortinarius species. Cortinarius is a huge genus. The last time I looked at it, when it was all Cortinarius, there were about 950 species in Europe, and now somebody's decided to hack it apart. So they won't all be called Cortinarius, but they will be in a similar grouping. And there will be even more of them as people go on investigating them. Okay, so this is a wonderful reserve, but it, like most of Oxfordshire, to be frank, is very close to centres of population that have A, posh restaurants, and B, quite a high population of people whose origins are from Central Europe and from Russia. And such people very often have a much better knowledge of fungi than the average Brit. They're good at identifying them, and they come from a culture of mycophagy, eating fungi. And if you're in the Carpathians, and there are very few of you, and an awful lot of Carpathian and a lot of woodland and a lot of fungi, that kind of consumptive use is absolutely okay. But it's tricky in Oxfordshire, and it's also not a very bright idea in protected areas. And this is an SSSI, but there's nothing to say, please don't trash the place and eat all the fungi. So very often visitors have little understanding of fungal conservation, and those that do may well be actually taking away one of the things that makes it special. So there is a big problem with gathering fungi. And the fungi can also be threatened by competing management options. And during 2020, having realised that the management body was planning to fell a lot of the old beeches, we went down there and had a meeting and tried to advise the Woodland Trust managers how best to retain the fungal interest, and we think most of that got through, which is a bit of a relief. Okay, so here are some of the finds from there. This is a coral fungus, quite a scarce one, called Romeria aurea, but there are lots of similar ones, and you might get one in the garden that looks very similar, that will grow on mulch. That would be Romeria stricta. This is aurea, primrose with little pink tips. Okay, this is an unusual form of quite a common russula, the brittle gills. It's a russula called Ionochlora, and it's normally kind of pinkish purplish with a few green bits. This is entirely bright green. It has a separate name even. It's the oil slick brittle gill, form Pelteroii. There will not be a test afterwards, you'll be glad to know. This is one of the Cortinarius. This is one of the commonest ones. It's called the yellow web cap. This doesn't look very yellow, but it can be really almost sort of primrose yellow like that. And you can see it's very elegant, and it has mauve gills. And Cortinariuses are named after the Cortina, which is not a family car, but a kind of web which is present around the base of the fungus, and then as it grows it bursts out of that, but remnants of that web or veil are still present, and they often drop onto the stem, and there they catch the spores, and those are fungal spores, and all Cortinarius have these brownish spores. At this point, hopefully you are all silenced, and so I can't hear you, but do feel free to go if I'm teaching my grandmother to suck eggs here. Okay, so another one. This is a big chunky one, the blue leg web cap, and similar colours but very different shape, sort of yellowish on top, wonderful bluish purple, and here you can see the Cortina. Okay. These were stood back up afterwards. And something we found since our last report, okay, it's not strictly in the year, but you haven't heard about it, so I'll mention it. This is a fungus that is new to the UK. This isn't quite such a big deal as it might sound, because there are lots of fungi new to the UK reported every year, but I thought I'd just mention this one. This is a very fine golden yellow fungus, again with a big bulb and various lilac tints to it. This one is Cortinarius bergeronii, and it was identified by an Italian expert who came over to look at some of our fungi at the invitation of Professor Forti. The snag about it is, macroscopically, it is absolutely identical to a fungus called Cortinarius elegantissimus, which is a fungus that I have painted, or have I? Because I don't know now whether what I painted was elegantissimus or this guy. And unfortunately, you can't do a DNA test on a picture. Unfortunately for field mycology, in order to get a report of a Cortinarius accepted by Kew, you have to take down its genes and do a DNA analysis, which is rather beyond most amateur mycologists. So there is a big problem now in reporting, and you're more likely to have to say probable than definite if you're working with something like Cortinarius. Okay, and here's a new to UK 2020 discoverer, wait for it, Richard Forti, our president. This is an agaricus, so that'll be the sort of thing that you would go and buy in Tesco's, except you won't get this one. So as I said, we're very glad that we are still discovering fungi new to the UK, and we hope this will continue this season. So here's my summary for 2020 and a brief forecast. 2020 was the best fungus season for about 30 years, for as long as I've been surveying. This was probably due to a wet summer and a warm autumn. They will not all pop up again this year. And this is not only the weather, but some fungi fruit very infrequently, so they probably won't reappear this year. And from what we've been looking at in Blenheim, the suite of things is completely different from what we were finding last year. It takes about 30 years constant recording of fruit bodies to get even a fairly accurate idea of the fungal populations at the site. DNA sampling is difficult and it requires more widespread expertise and funding. And most fungi are under threat from pollution, trampling, especially from the increased use of the countryside. People want to get out and find out what the outside world is about, which is absolutely great. But there's a lot of education that we need to try and inculcate so that people realise what are the best ways to comport themselves in the countryside. And grassland fungi didn't do so well in 2020, I'm sorry to say. Okay, so here's a taster for 2021. This is from this year. An acquaintance of mine reported this from the other side of the county. This is the sandy stilt ball, totally weird. All the spores pour off the cap like that. Looks like an ordinary agaric, but it isn't at all. This is very rare nationally. It's legally protected. And according to the National Atlas, it's new to Oxfordshire, though I think I know a few people who might know some sites in Oxfordshire that haven't been reported, but this one has. So great. Now, I think if we're using what I sent you in advance, that's probably the end. Yes, it will be the end. So I'd just like to say details of the FSO are available. Sorry, I didn't want to go there. I haven't asked it to go there. Please go back. Because I just want to leave you with an image of some of the more beautiful fungi that you will find pretty well every year if you go out surveying. Grassland, parrot waxcap, and here amethyst deceivers and a Russula ochroluca. So this is Oxford. That says Floriat fungus. When I revised it, I thought we better have more than one. It's Floriant fungus. But please let me inspire you to come out and get some more records so we can report on for next year. Thank you.